England, late 1942. The air war over Europe is a meat grinder. The British RAF pilots are flying the Spitfire. It is a ballerina of the sky, small, elegant, deadly, and beautiful. But today, their American allies have brought something different, something monstrous. The British pilots stare in disbelief. The plane sitting on the tarmac dwarfs their Spitfires. It stands 14 feet tall. It weighs 7 tons fully loaded, twice the weight of a Spitfire and heavier than some German bombers. Its fuselage is thick and round. Its wings are heavy. It doesn't look like a fighter. It looks like a beer keg with wings. The jokes start immediately. "What is that?" one RAF pilot asks. "A fighter or a bathtub?" Another quips, "It looks like a flying milk jug." They warn the American pilots. If you get into a turning fight with a German Bf-109 in that thing, you're dead. It's a dinosaur. It's a brick. Even the American pilots are terrified. When they climb into the cockpit, it's so wide they can't touch the sides. It feels like sitting in a cathedral. They nicknamed it the Jug. It wasn't a compliment. It was short for juggernaut, or simply because it looked like a fat, clumsy jug of milk. But the laughter was about to stop, because the British and the Germans didn't understand why the P-47 was so big. They didn't see the secret hiding inside that massive fuselage. To understand the P-47, you have to understand the genius of its designer, Alexander Cardvelli. Cardvelli wasn't trying to build a dogfighter. He was trying to solve a physics problem. The U.S. Army Air Force had a specific requirement. They needed a fighter that could fly high, above 30,000 feet, and escort bombers. But at that altitude, the air is thin. Engines starve. They lose power. To fly high, you need a Turbo-Supercharger. This is why the Jug was fat. Look at the plumbing. The massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine sat in the front, but the turbocharger was in the back, behind the pilot. Here is the crazy part. The exhaust gases from the engine had to travel through pipes, under the cockpit, all the way to the tail to spin the turbine. The turbine sucked in fresh air, compressed it, and sent it back through the belly to an intercooler, and then back to the engine in the front. The pilot was essentially straddling a giant red-hot piping system. The fuselage had to be huge to hold all that ducting. The milk jug wasn't fat because of bad design. It was fat because it was literally a giant flying lung. And then there was the heart, the R2800 double wasp, 2,000 horsepower, the most powerful aircraft engine ever mass-produced at that time. It was an 18-cylinder radial beast. It didn't purr like the Merlin engine in the Mustang. It roared. It sounded like a rock crusher. Cardvelli had built the ultimate muscle car of the sky. But as the pilots were about to find out, muscle isn't enough when you're fighting a ninja. Early 1943, the Jug goes to war, and the critics seem to be right. The German Luftwaffe pilots, flying the nimble Focke-Wulf 190 and the Bf-109, saw the P-47s coming. They saw these massive, heavy American planes, and they laughed. The American pilots made a fatal mistake. They tried to dogfight. They tried to turn. You cannot turn a 7-ton milk truck against a sports car. The P-47s bled speed. They stalled.
They were outmaneuvered. The German pilots would simply turn inside the P-47, get on its tail, and open fire. The losses mounted. Morale plummeted. The pilots screamed at their commanders, "Give us Spitfires! Give us Mustangs! This thing is a death trap." But one man saw the potential. Colonel Hub Zemke. He realized the problem wasn't the plane, it was the tactic. He told his men, "If you try to turn with a jury, you're dead. Do not turn. I repeat, do not turn." Instead, Zemke introduced a new way of fighting. Physics over finesse. He told them to use the dive. The P-47 was heavy. In a climb, gravity was its enemy. But in a dive, gravity was its fuel. When a P-47 nosed over, it dropped like a safe falling out of a window. It accelerated faster than any prop plane in the world. It could break 550 miles per hour in a dive. The German pilots were shocked. They would dive to escape, a move that worked against Spitfires. But when they looked back, the fat jug was still there, getting bigger, gaining on them. The P-47 hit them like a freight train. Boom, zoom, slash attacks. Dive in, fire, use the speed to climb back up to safety. Energy fighting. But the Germans had one more nasty surprise for the Americans. If they couldn't outrun the jug, they would try to destroy it. And that led to the greatest revelation of the war.
This is the story that changed everything. The story that turned the joke into the legend. June 26, 1943. A young pilot named Robert S. Johnson is flying escort duty. He gets separated from his squadron. Suddenly, he is bounced by a swarm of Focke-Wulf 190s. 20mm cannon shells rip into his plane. His hydraulic fluid explodes. His cockpit fills with oil and smoke. Johnson tries to bail out, but the canopy is jammed. A shell has crushed the rail. He is trapped. He is a sitting duck. A German ace, Egon Meyer, pulls up behind him. Meyer sees the crippled P-47. He sees the pilot trapped inside. This should be easy. Meyer lines up perfectly. He is 50 yards away. He opens fire with everything he has. Machine gun bullets pepper the fuselage. Cannon shells blow holes in the rudder. Johnson hunches down behind his armor plate, waiting to die. He feels the impacts. Clang, 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 like a hailstorm inside a tin shed. Meyer runs out of ammo. He pulls away, stunned. The P-47 is still flying. A second German attacks. He empties his guns. The P-47 shudders. It smokes. It leaks oil, but it does not fall. Why? Because the P-47 wasn't built like a Spitfire or a Zero. It didn't have a fragile liquid-cooled engine that would seize up if one bullet hit the radiator. It had the radial engine, air-cooled. You could shoot a cylinder off, and the other 17 would keep pumping. It had self-sealing fuel tanks. It had a bathtub of armor plate around the pilot. Egon Meyer, the German ace, flew alongside Johnson. He looked at the American plane. The rudder was gone. The flaps were shredded. There were hundreds of holes in the skin. It looked like Swiss cheese. Meyer couldn't believe it was still in the air. He saluted Johnson, rocked his wings, and flew away. He knew he couldn't kill the beast. Johnson landed in England. When he got out, he kissed the ground. The mechanics stopped counting the bullet holes when they reached 200. There were 5 20mm cannon shell impacts. Any other plane, a Mustang,
a Spitfire, would have disintegrated. The Jug brought him home. That day, the laughter died. The pilots stopped calling it a milk jug. They started calling it the unbreakable. They realized that while the P-51 Mustang might get all the glory and the Spitfire might get all the girls, if you wanted to survive, if you wanted to fly into hell and come back, you strapped yourself into a P-47 Thunderbolt. And now that they knew they were invincible, they went on the offensive. Survival was one thing, but to win a war, you have to kill the enemy. And this is where the sheer size of the milk jug became its greatest weapon. Because the wings were so thick and the fuselage was so wide, Alexander Kartveli didn't have to skimp on firepower. He didn't give it 4 guns like the Wildcat. He didn't give it 6 guns like the Mustang. He gave it 8. 8 massive, air-cooled Browning M2 .50 caliber machine guns. When a pilot squeezed the trigger, he wasn't just shooting. He was unleashing a natural disaster. These 8 guns fired 100 rounds every single second. That is 13 pounds of lead impacting the target per second. German pilots described being hit by a P-47 not as taking fire, but as hitting a brick wall. The sheer kinetic energy of 8 heavy machine guns would literally saw a German plane in half. It didn't matter if you had armor. It didn't matter if you were a bomber. If a P-47 got you in its sights, you simply disintegrated. But by 1944, the Luftwaffe was disappearing. The P-47 had done its job too well. There were no planes left to fight. So the Jug looked down. It saw the tanks. It saw the trains. It saw the Nazi war machine moving on the ground. And it decided to destroy that too.
Late 1944, the invasion of Europe. The P-47 found its true calling. It wasn't just a fighter. It became the deadliest ground attack aircraft of the war. The Germans called them Jabos, Jagdbomber, fighter bombers, and they were terrified of them. Remember that massive 2,000 horsepower engine? It allowed the P-47 to carry a payload that was, frankly, ridiculous. A fully loaded P-47 could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs. To put that in perspective, that is more than a B-17 Flying Fortress carried on a long-range mission. A single-seat fighter carrying a heavy bomber's payload. For German train engineers, the P-47 was the Grim Reaper. The pilots developed a tactic. They didn't bomb the tracks, they aimed for the boiler of the locomotive. The .5 caliber armor-piercing rounds would punch through the steel boiler. The locomotive would explode in a cloud of scalding steam. In France alone, P-47s destroyed 86,000 railway cars and 9,000 locomotives. They paralyzed the German army. Nothing could move by day. General Patton famously said that the P-47 and the Sherman tank were the 2 things that allowed him to race across France. But it wasn't just trains, it was tanks. The P-47s were fitted with rockets. They would dive on the feared Tiger tanks. The rockets would crack the armor, the bombs would flip 60-ton tanks upside down like toys. And through it all, the Jug kept taking punishment. Ground attack is dangerous. You are flying into flak, small arms fire, and even trees. There are stories of P-47s clipping treetops, hitting telephone poles. One pilot, flying so low, actually hit a German soldier with his wingtip and flew home with a dent in the metal. If you did that in a P-51 Mustang,
The radiator would rupture, the engine would seize, and you would be a prisoner of war. In a P-47, you just trimmed the rudder and flew home for dinner.
The war ended in 1945. The jet age arrived. The P-47, with its propeller and its bulk, was obsolete. Thousands were scrapped, melted down into aluminum ingots. But among the men who flew in World War II, a debate raged on. Which was better, the P-51 Mustang or the P-47 Thunderbolt? The public loved the Mustang. It was sexy. It was the Cadillac of the skies. It escorted the bombers to Berlin. It got the glory. But ask a pilot. Ask the men who had to fly into the teeth of the German guns. There is an old saying among the Army Air Force pilots: if you want to take a picture for your girlfriend, fly a P-51. If you want to survive to see your girlfriend again, fly a P-47. The P-47 wasn't pretty. It wasn't elegant. It was a brute. It was a 7-ton sledgehammer in a world of rapiers. It started as a joke, a flying milk jug, a bathtub. But by the end of the war, it had destroyed 7,000 enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground. It had dropped 132,000 tons of bombs. And it had brought thousands of American boys home who would have died in any other plane. It turns out the British were wrong. The Germans were wrong. It wasn't a dinosaur. It was the Thunderbolt. And when it struck, the world shook.